Hi. Oh no! Oh, that was disastrous. Hang on. Hang on. So I've got this, not perfect setup going on behind my computer. Oh no, I don't know what just happened. Hang on a second. This is not going according to plan. Got this complicated tripod situation happening. I think it's more complicated than it needs to be right now. So I'm going to do away with that. And probably getting some glimpses of my sweet lighting setup here as I wave my camera around irresponsibly. Okay, let's see. Yeah, it kind of works. Let's see. Oh! Yeah, this is not going well. Okay. Let's try this again. Now I'm like way down at the bottom of everything. Well, could be worse, I guess. Let's see. All right. Okay, well anyway, hey world. I don't know how to make this work right now, and I'm already live, so that kind of blows. I thought I had a rubber band somewhere, but I don't. Alright, well, I'm just going to be down in the bottom of the screen. No, JL, I don't want to mess with it anymore. Okay, so, anyway, I'm going to read a chapter from my book. I just had, like, major technical difficulties. I hope that nobody was watching for most of them. I don't think anybody was. But I also really hope that I can, edit this video before I post it on Facebook so that I could get rid of the first 5 minutes of me fumbling with a tripod that screwed up and a phone that dropped on the ground, so yeah. Anyway, we're not off to a good start, but hopefully we will bring it back from the brink of bad video-ness? I don't really know what the, it's not really like the brink of doom or anything, but it's not a brink I want to be on? I don't know. Anyway, hello world. I am way down here in the bottom of the video screen today, coming to you live from Missoula, Montana, where I think it just stopped snowing. It was snowing for a while there. It's been snowing on and off for a few days, so it's clearly getting chilly out, and I'm wearing sweaters, and it's, you know, November up in this piece. So, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Lynsey G. I am a writer, an editor, a proofreader, a writing coach, a publisher. I am also the author of this book, Watching Porn, which is a book that I wrote. It's part memoir, part informative text about the adult entertainment industry, which I have been writing about as a journalist and a columnist, a reviewer, interviewer, etc. For, I think it's over 10 years now. I think it's like 11 or 12 years. Started out sort of accidentally by reviewing porn DVDs for an adult magazine, and got really interested in the subject matter, which at the time I didn't see anyone really taking seriously, so I started writing columns about it and op-eds and so on. Hi Rosetta! Thank you for the view, I really appreciate it, and for the well wishes. So anyway, I continued on into becoming like an actual journalist who writes primarily about the adult entertainment industry and other things that have to do with the sex industry. I've written about, you know, escorts and cam girls and I know there's something big I'm missing here. Oh, right, adult novelties. I write about sex toys a lot. But primarily I focus on porn because I think that it's a really interesting industry that very few people know a lot about, even though it's a big part of many of our lives. You know, many of us interact with porn regularly, but we don't really understand much about how it works. So I wrote this book, which is sort of like my journey through the porn industry for the first 10-ish years. And so it sort of gives readers a glimpse through my eyes of the things that I have learned about, the questions that I've had, the people I've met, and so on. So today I'm going to be reading chapter 5 from this book. But before I do that, I want to talk to you guys about my Kickstarter. So if anyone who is watching this now or later doesn't know, somehow, because it's like all I talk about recently, I am kickstarting the first volume of the other book that I wrote about porn, which is a graphic novel. It's fiction, as the word novel would suggest. It's called Tracy Queen. And it is about a woman who basically finds her path, her passion, and herself in the act of making porn. So it's a very complicated story. She is a complicated character, and it's a long story. It's going to eventually be 7 volumes collected into like one giant graphic novel. So we are trying to publish it volume by volume. So the first volume is right now being kickstarted. I'm trying to raise money to pay the people who were involved in the production process, including myself. Yay! It would be great to get paid for work that I did, you know? But also the artists, the letterers, well, there's one letterer, the flatter, the cover artist, and also make enough to print the thing so that I can send it out to everyone who backs the Kickstarter, and also to comic book stores and, you know, anyone else who wants it out in the world. I'm really, 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 really excited about the opportunity to get this story out. I've been working on it for, I think, about 7 years, somewhere around there, and I think it's ready, and I think the world needs it. I think it's an important story. It covers a lot of topics that are really close to my heart, but topics that I think are also just really important for there to be more discussion around. You know, like topics of consent, topics of sexual empowerment. You know, Tracy's character, like I said, really finds herself by becoming a more sexually empowered person. And I think that a lot of us could do the same. Should do the same. I think that the world would be a better place if more of us were able to do the same without fear. Tracy isn't able to do it without fear. She makes a lot of enemies along the way, and the sort of climactic scene of the entire book is this huge battle that she fights against sort of the forces of kind of sexual repression and this guy who wants to own her career and her body and her sexuality, and she's like, no, I finally found myself, you can't take it away from me. So she gets a band of actual real life, like, indie and queer and feminist porn folks together as like the band of love warriors, and they take on the forces of repression along with Tracy's cyborg clone army, which is a whole other thing, which we'll see a lot of in the first volume, but we don't actually get into the explanation of how they came to be for a while yet, so I'm not going to give too much away. Anyway, I'm going to show you a little bit of Tracy Queen. Now, this is actually from the second volume of Tracy Queen, the images that I have here. We're publishing a bit at a time in the pages of the Oneshi Press Quarterly Anthology right now. So these are the first few pages of the second volume of Tracy Queen. I'm gonna get up close there so you can see these awesome illustrations by J.L. Draco. He's been the artist on this since the very beginning, and he really developed Tracy's look. right here she's, you know, casually wearing crazy lingerie around the house, like you do. She really likes lingerie. It makes her feel very powerful, so she wears it kind of all the time once she really gets into the lingerie game. This is a battlefield scene with her nemesis. So yeah, this just kind of gives you an idea, like, what it is I'm kickstarting, even though these are pages from a different volume. I really think that people who do sex work, and there's a lot of different kinds of sex work, so this isn't, you know, totally a blanket statement, but people who do voluntary sex work, you know, who do escorting or who are, you know, in the porn industry, people who do cam work, that kind of stuff. There's been a lot more discussion around those topics, around the work that they do in recent years than there was for a long time, and actually, like, serious discussion, like, it's being taken more seriously, I think. But I feel like there's still this idea in most of the mainstream public that in order to do sex work, something has to, like, have happened to you. Like, you have to be broken fundamentally somehow. And I vehemently disagree with that idea. I've met a ton of people who work in the sex industry, and sure, yeah, some of them have had bad things happen to them, you know? But I know plenty of people who aren't in the sex industry that have also had bad things happen to them. And I know a lot of people in the sex industry who are, like, really just normal folks. You know, maybe they have, like, a higher sex drive than some of us. Maybe they're exhibitionists. But, again, I know plenty of people who don't work in the sex industry who are also exhibitionists. There's really, like, there's no difference between sex workers and people who aren't sex workers. And I think that Tracy's story, since we follow her from, like, the beginning of her journey where she's never even considered it as an option, through, you know, becoming a webcammer, and then going into, like, more full-fledged, like, porn production, you know, meeting lots of people and learning to respect herself and her body and her boundaries and those of other people better. Like, her journey, even though it's got cyborg clones in it and a talking raccoon and a lot of, like, you know, over-the-top fun sci-fi stuff in it, Tracy's story can really help, I think, readers go along on that journey and maybe hopefully come to the realization that, you know, she's just a person and this is a legit career path, and that there's nothing different about her or about, well, there are things that are different about Tracy because she's a sci-fi hero. But, you know, she's fundamentally a human being, and so are many other people who do the same stuff that she does. So anyway, I think that it's really an important story, and I really, really want to fund the first volume of it. So if anyone is out there and watching this, please go to Kickstarter, look up Tracy Queen Volume 1, and if you're able to share it on your social media, use the hashtag TracyQueenIsComing. That way I can see that you posted it, and I can say thank you. Okay, so that's what's happening with Tracy Queen and the Kickstarter. So now I'm going to go into the other book that I wrote about porn, watching porn. Okay, so I think last week we left off with chapter 4, and I was talking about, you know, my early days as a porn reviewer. I was reviewing porn DVDs for an adult magazine. This week we're going to go into chapter 5, which is called The Backward Slide, and talks a little bit more about that time in my life, where I was at with my, like, understanding of and relationship with pornography. And yeah, I'm going to take some tea first. Okay, so I'm going to read most of the chapter. I've cut a few things out just for length purposes, because I feel like as I go through the book, the chapters get longer, and sooner or later we're going to get to the point where, like, oh my god, I can't read this whole chapter. So I'm taking little cuts here and there. And if you're watching this, please stick around, because afterward I am going to do a Q&A with anyone that has questions about what I read, or about my work, or about Tracy Queen. A wink, a wink. Okay, so chapter 5, the backward slide. I'm going to show you this image that they put at the beginning of this chapter. That's me and Cindy Gallop in 2011, I believe, at the AVN Awards. That's still, to date, the only time I've ever actually gone to the AVN Awards ceremony, which is like, it's seriously like 4 hours long. And they charge you a lot for drinks. Like a lot. I spent a lot of money just like drinking whiskey to try to keep myself awake through that. So I've never been back after that. I've been to the AVN convention in Las Vegas many times, but this is the only time I went to the award ceremony. The AVNs stand for Adult Video News, which is like the biggest trade publication in the adult industry, and once a year they give out awards, which are the super prestigious ones. They're called the Oscars of porn a lot of the time. And Cindy Gallop, you're going to hear a lot from her over the course of this book. I strongly recommend that you look her up. She is a badass in multiple ways. She is, she started out, at least, she didn't start out. Okay, how do you describe somebody's career? She became well known in her career as an ad executive. She worked for a huge ad agency in New York in the 90s and early 2000s, and then quit that job to become an entrepreneur. And now she runs a website called MakeLoveNotPorn.tv, which I'm going to see if I can remember the tagline. It's pro porn, pro sex, pro knowing the difference. So her whole thing is that a lot of people get all of their sex education from porn these days, and there's nothing wrong with watching porn, but that it's important to understand the difference between real-world sex and porn sex, which I'm actually going to talk about a lot in this chapter. And so her website curates videos that real-world couples, triples, solos, whatever, people in the real world send in of themselves having sex. So you get like a really different look and feel from it. But it's not just amateur content. It's like created on purpose, like, you know, and it's created to be beautiful a lot of the time. But it sort of prides itself on realism. So definitely go check it out. It's a great website, and actually the website interface is pretty much safe for work until you, like, if you want to preview a video or something, then you get into the sexy stuff. But you can actually look at it for the most part on any computer as long as it doesn't get blocked because of the word porn. So MakeLoveNotPorn.tv, Cindy Gallop, badass. And I actually thought it was kind of funny that they put this photo at the beginning of this chapter, because this actually doesn't happen until much later in the book. But now that I think about it, her website and what it stands for deals with a lot of the same topics that are covered in this chapter. So maybe the person who put the photos in the book was paying more attention than I gave them credit for. Okay, onward. I am going to read to you from Chapter 5, The Backward Slide. In early October of 2007, I landed a gig at a second dirty magazine, for which I wrote set copy for photographic spreads of ladies with large bosoms. You know, this is Sally, and she likes long walks on the beach, frozen daiquiris, and cradling big boners between her double F cups. That kind of thing. I concocted 500 words. That was a weird way of wording this. I shouldn't have let that sentence go into this book. I concocted 500 words about each woman in the magazine, often according to some theme. Big-titted tramps of the UK, for instance. The money was almost as good as what I got for reviews, and I didn't have to fast-forward through hours of hardcore porn to get it. In fact, I rarely even saw the photos I was supposed to be writing about. I just make up a name and a story, let my imagination run, and allow the editors to pair my words with a model. Months later, I would get a copy of the magazine and stare in disbelief at Maisie's smiling face and boobs, unbelieving. How could they think that was Maisie? Maisie would never wear that bra and panty set. Ridiculous. Thus set up with a second gig, I was prepared to take the financial hit when the first magazine went bankrupt at the end of 2007. It had been a short run, but it had come through for me when I needed it. I wasn't, however, exactly heartbroken to be giving up reviewing titles like Breast Meat and Teens Like It Big No. 4, which actually, Teens Like It Big may be an ongoing series. I think that is still going. It's probably like number 57 by now. I'd already amassed an alarming repertoire of silly names for body parts, become aware of positions and activities I would never have dreamed up on my own, and developed a knack for alliterating jokes about all of them. The editorial director, Charles, assured me that if another publishing company bought out the magazine, I would be reviewing for him again as soon as possible. But Jay Vegas, my editor, was made no such promises. He was given full unemployment benefits, however, and relegated to his apartment in Washington Heights, not much worse for the wear. We developed a close friendship, partly aided by alcohol and marijuana, so he included me in his plans to write a satirical web series about working in the smut business. It was a lifelong dream, he told me, and it had been realized more comically than he had expected. As an aspiring filmmaker, he felt the experience had to be memorialized. As months passed, I surreptitiously praised the gigantic jugs that dominated Lizzie's life, and got Pauline kicked out of boarding school for distracting the sapphic nuns, all while assisting with the sales of extremely expensive contemporary art. Oh, hey, Tracy. I slid right back into my internet porn habit. It was surreal. I now knew the names of the actors and their oeuvres, their preferences, even their dirty talk styles. I appreciated them, at least more than I had before, as human beings, and yet I gravitated back to the free, pirated clips of their material, fully aware that I was stealing from them and contributing to the industry-wide collapse that had cost me my first paid writing gig. As Lux Alptraum, a porn critic and journalist, summed it up for me, it can be really, really difficult to negotiate ethics when orgasms are concerned. Sometimes your orgasm is not concerned with whether somebody got paid for that day. In a lot of ways, I was concerned about people getting paid, but like Lux said, my orgasms were not. I had a boyfriend who was ready to go at the drop of a hat. I had stacks of porn DVDs under the bed, which I could have watched any time I wanted. Most of them were filmed in HD and featured behind-the-scenes footage, cumshot compilations, and lots of other goodies that the streaming video clips on free websites couldn't match. Yet I kept reverting to the same crappy websites I'd frequented for years. I felt like an anomaly, aware of the harm my habit was doing, getting laid but nevertheless gravitating back to pirated porn, and being a woman to boot. I've heard the old platitudes that women don't like porn because they're not visual, that porn is for men. Women, the thinking popularized by Alfred Kinsey in the 1950s goes, are more complicated creatures than their male counterparts, and require a more complex series of switches to be flipped on in our brains before we can get aroused. The authors of A Billion Wicked Thoughts write, "The male brain is designed to be more visually responsive to sexual stimuli than the female brain, which they dub the most sophisticated neural structure on Earth." And they back these claims up with investigative journalism, citing study after study claiming that, whereas men get a rise from looking at a pair of boobs, women don't find much eroticism in those boobs unless they know whom they belong to, why they're being displayed, who else can see them, and whether the set dresser knows that the lamp on the bedside table isn't even plugged in. I'm going to take a moment here. There's a little footnote I put down at the bottom. It says, "I don't like to use binary language in writing about sex and desire. Particularly when it comes to brains and genitals and their interactions, there is such a massive range of experiences, preferences, gender identities, body types, brain types, and so on, that it feels disingenuous to me to pretend as if male and female are the only two categories upon which to draw. Unfortunately, the vast majority of scientific inquiry into these matters so far has broken subjects of study down into these binary terms, focusing on the experiences of cisgender people with fairly typical sexual function. I hope that changes soon because there's so much to be learned from the rest of the world of human sexuality." So, yeah, anyway, I just wanted to add that because I really hate it that it's all like men versus women when it comes to sex stuff. Because if you actually do a lot of reading into sexuality, human sexuality, it'll pretty much always say that within each gender there is more variation than there is between the two genders, which is basically just saying, like, everyone is wildly different. And so breaking people down into just two categories feels, like, extremely reductive to me. But it's where we're at scientifically, so that's what I have to draw on, you know, when I'm talking about science and sexuality. So it's a bummer, but hopefully we will get farther someday. Let's see. Okay, the desire for context, this conventional wisdom tells us, is the reason that women gravitate toward romance novels and erotica, written works that provide them with all the background information they crave, while men enjoy the direct visual stimulation that porn provides. I can't deny the allure of a good paperback, a good romance paperback, I mean. When I was in middle school, my friends and I passed one novel around, rereading it until the spine broke and the book split in half. And we were part of a much larger trend. According to A Billion Wicked Thoughts, the romance novel industry pulled in $1.37 billion in 2008, and 90% of its readers were women. Since the advent of 50 Shades of Grey, erotica readership has skyrocketed, making the so-called porn for women genre an even bigger seller. But I still liked porn for men just as much, and probably more. And it wasn't just me. Women are far from immune to the visual cues that erotic films provide. Check this out. In 2004, a study conducted by Meredith Chivers of Queen's University in Canada, women were hooked up to a plethysmograph, a device that tests the blood flow to the vaginal walls, and shown photos of a wide range of erotic and non-erotic photos. Afterward, they were asked about how aroused they had felt, and their answers were compared to the plethysmograph's findings. That is a hard word to say. The results were stunning. Physically, the women were aroused by literally all of the erotic images, regardless of their sexual orientation or even their species. Some of the photos showed apes going at it. But psychologically, not so much. Most women only reported feeling turned on by the type of smut that tickled their particular fancy. Heterosexual women said that they responded to heterosexual sex, and so on. None of them reported feeling any psychological response to the ape sex, but the proof was in the pussy, as they say. These women's bodies did react to pornographic images of literally all kinds, whether their conscious minds picked up on it or not. It's not much of a stretch to say, based on this research, that women are just as aroused by porn as anybody else. They may just not be aware of it, or willing to own up to it. So there I was, with the bedroom door locked and my laptop fired up to prove it. I wanted hot visual stimuli that would turn me on easily, without complications. There was something about being able to get off without noticing the credits, the lighting, the music, the company logo, that I appreciated. It was all painless and simple. As director Ivan told me, I think one of the reasons that the internet is so popular is that you can find what you want, watch it, stroke it. Oh my god. Wait. Stroke it? That's not a thing. Okay, back up. As director Ivan told me, I think one of the reasons the internet is so popular is that you can find what you want, watch it, stroke it, and off you go. He was on to something. Particularly for women, the internet has become a haven for the exploration of taboo fantasies. As the authors of A Billion Wicked Thoughts put it, women who previously felt too mortified to be seen in the back room of the local video rental store are finally empowered to explore their erotic interests in privacy and comfort in the internet age. The freedom of online porn viewing isn't just exciting, it's foundational. After years of experience talking to people about pornography, I know I'm not alone in my proclivity for easy orgasms, especially when it comes to people my age and younger, regardless of gender identity. There is something incredibly seductive about the quick and almost mechanical payoff of the disembodied clip or animated GIF showing just the best few moments of a porn scene. It is delightfully and damningly easy, even for my female body, to get aroused by the simple mechanisms of sex without involving the difficult moral baggage of real human beings, their stories, or their motivations. Prevailing wisdom about women's preference for context be damned. Online pornography's devastatingly simple format and non-existent price tag prove alluring enough to bring millions of women to the internet seeking quick and easy orgasms. With every passing year, women are viewing porn in greater numbers and getting more vocal about their habits. In the last quarter of 2015, Mary Claire reported that a whopping 30% of women they'd surveyed declared that they viewed porn at least once a week. And Pornhub reported in its 2017 year-end review that just over a quarter of its viewers worldwide were women, and that searches for the term porn for women had increased by 1,400% that year. As discourse around the subject of pornography opens up, some of the stigma once attached to watching blue movies has been lifted, and more of us are poking our heads out of our shame dungeons to talk about our habits. More than that, whereas porn used to be a veritable desert for women who wanted an alternative to the standard made by men for men fare, the past decade has seen a huge spike in porn made for women by women, as well as porn made for queer and non-binary folks, with viewers in mind who aren't necessarily straight white men. These companies clearly give female viewers, and viewers of any other gender identity, a case of the old warm and fuzzies, as well as the wet and slipperies. Hang on a sec. I'm going to let you think about that little joke while I take a sip. Get it? The wet and slipperies? All right. It's not only out of self-interest that I implore you to believe that people aren't depraved sex maniacs if they tend toward a simplified version of pornography, but I do find some relief in asserting that I am normal. Free, fast, and easy can also be called efficient, and I'm a sucker for practicality. Yet, as 2008 began, I worried about the effects of masturbatory efficiency on myself and the rest of us. Were we, sacrificing the experience of fantasy for the simple mechanics of sex? It's certainly no revelation that easy is, well, easier than intimate. But it's less obvious that our penchant for what's easy over what's meaningful could be reflected in our porn viewing habits, or that those habits might extend into our personal sex lives. And it's certainly far beyond my singular ability to prove that this might be the case. But a staggering amount of anecdotal evidence amassed by myself and others points to a developing trend in which young people who have been watching hardcore pornography from an early age take that hardcore pornography to heart. There's nothing wrong, per se, with trying out a move you learned from porn in the bedroom. But when the totality of one's sexual experience is downloaded directly from porn, there might be reason to pause. Porn operates as default sex ed. Sex tech disruptor Cindy Gallop told me in an interview several years after I began writing about porn. In the complete absence of a counterpoint of an open, healthy discussion of parents feeling able to teach their kids about sex as opposed to feeling utterly embarrassed about it, in the absence of schools and colleges operating an open, honest sex ed curriculum. The scarcity of reliable sex education available to young people in America makes online pornography an easy substitute. As of the time I'm writing this, only 23 states mandate sex education at all, and only 13 require it to be medically accurate. I think that there's now 27 states that require sex ed, but there's still only 13 that require it to actually be medically accurate. Brilliant, right? Most sex ed in this country focuses on the male external anatomy and discusses erections and ejaculation, but girls are taught about menstruation and pregnancy risks instead of their anatomies or orgasmic potential. And I think that that might not even be true anymore. I think that most places in this country mandate abstinence-based sex education, which doesn't teach anybody anything about anything. So, that's great. School isn't educating the youth about sex, and it seems that neither are parents. The pornography industry author, that's a book. The book, The Pornography Industry's author, Shira Tarrant, writes, between 1998 and 2005, there was a tenfold increase in the number of porn videos produced. Yet a survey of teenagers conducted by Psychology magazine found that during the same time period, 75% of parents never talked with their children about pornography. There is a vacuum being created, and it's not difficult to see why many young people turn to the mountains of smut on the internet to find out about sex. And these days, there aren't many ways to get information as trustworthy as what we can see people doing on Pornhub. As Mike Stabile, a spokesperson for Kink.com and the director of communications for the Free Speech Coalition, said in an interview with Mark Hay, sexuality has always operated in tandem with pornography. Pornography tends to crystallize desires that you might not have articulated. And for those whose desires haven't even fully formed yet, it can be a system of guidance that easily jumps off the rails. Even porn stars I've spoken to have learned about sex from the industry they would one day enter, and the lessons that they learned were often of a particular nature. At AVN in 2010, performer Andy San Dimas told me, I started watching porn in high school because I wanted to suck dick better. So I studied how to give a really nasty blowjob, like really intense and gross. There's no reason that a nasty, intense, gross blowjob is any better or worse than a polite, discreet blowjob, of course. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on anyone who genuinely prefers athletic sex over candles, R&B, and rose petals, or anyone who enjoys athletic sex along with said romantic accompaniment. It's of dire importance, I believe, that nobody with an interest in or relationship with the adult industry, which is to say, everyone, judges the lives or fantasies of others, whether on screen or off. We're all in this mess together, and nobody's preferences are better than anyone else's. Fantasies are personal, private, and innocuous, unless they're acted out on an unwilling partner. But when fantasies are derived from pornography, a few things can get lost in translation, things that can cause problems. As many porn actors have told me, and as many sex-positive thinkers have echoed, fantasy is not the same as reality, and porn is only a fantasy acted out for the gratification of the masses. Porn sex is not real sex, though there's a real danger in conflating the two. As now retired performer Kelly Shibari told me in a 2012 interview, It's sex because there's actual penetration and a guy ejaculates at the end. Besides that, it is so not sex. Sex, to me, in real life, involves a lot of tenderness that you really don't see a lot of in porn. A lot of close tenderness that you can't get a camera inside. The camera's presence on a porn set doesn't just change the level of intimacy between partners, it physically alters the way that sex is choreographed. On most sets, the performers must open up to the camera, with plenty of room for light and a camera lens in between bodies. This results in sex that not only looks very different from what many of us find physically pleasurable, but also sex that is difficult to perform. Porn actors are professionals in their field and are often capable of feats of strength and endurance that the rest of us could never match. These superhuman acts are performed in controlled environments, under the watchful eyes of directors and camera crews who are ready to call cut at a moment's notice if things go wrong. And things do go wrong. Ask any porn model about mishaps on set and you will get an earful. I once wrote a whole article about what happens when performers fart on camera, and what didn't make it into the finished product were the tales of, shall we say, more than farts that almost everyone I interviewed could tell me about. So, just keep that in mind. But we don't see these faux pas in the edited cuts that make their way onto the internet, or the mountains of preparation that performers go through to avoid these slip-ups. Feminist pornographer and performance artist Madison Young said something once that really stuck with me. She said, "You're not going to see necessarily the enema in the bathroom, or the 5 enemas that you did in the bathroom before being anally fisted." The mental image is striking. Nor do viewers witness the cuts between positions, the reapplication of lube, or the 10 minutes it often takes between the sometimes very long cut and the male performer reaching orgasm. Danny Wylde, aka Chris Zeischegg, told me once that in porn you see a facial. I think it's just a matter of convenience almost. It's like, we get her to that point, then we cut. Now the guy gets ready to ejaculate, however he does that, and then he comes over and does his thing. I don't think many consumers have any idea how bizarre that whole process is. What I'm trying to say is that we as consumers are not privy to the realities of the fantasy sex we may be trying to reenact at home. What we see is heavily edited, hand-picked series of video pieces that leads us to believe that this superhuman sex is easy, natural, and satisfying, and we can take that message to heart. Compounding the blurry line between porn fantasy and honest-to-goodness reality is the fact that, while Hollywood can revert to stunt people, smoke, mirrors, and CGI for action sequences, pornography uses flesh-and-blood Homo sapiens honest-to-God banging. Or blow-banging, or gang-banging, as the case may be. In porn, it's not really real sex happening naturally for its own sake, but it is showing really real human beings engaged in real sex acts. Retired performer Oriana Small told me in an interview that on her hardcore sets, "I cried a bunch of times. There was a time when I would cry in every scene because I would get so overwhelmed and it was so emotional. It was so real." This realness complicates the impulse to give porn a pass for its status as fantasy, particularly when the fantasy in question is hardcore gonzo porn that depicts gagging, asphyxiation, slapping, spitting, and the like. Sans disclaimer that, while many people engage in these activities for their own pleasure, they're not everyone's cup of tea, and they're best attempted by those with a lot of experience. As the months went by without a noticeable change in my online habits, I caught myself thinking more about the people in the clips I was watching. I'd been able to pull the wool over my own eyes before, my ignorance of the industry giving me a lame but still convincing excuse to divest myself of responsibility. But my months of reviewing had given me a peek into where all this fantasy material I was bootlegging came from, and I couldn't squash my conscience so easily anymore. But I was in a unique position from which this train of thought was almost unavoidable. For the tens of millions who visit Pornhub every day, it's very easy to avoid thinking about the people who make pornography, or the differences between real-world sex and porn sex. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about the mainstreaming of porn, but I believe that the actual effects of porn on most lives is nearly as silent a topic as it's ever been. Be honest. When's the last time you had a real conversation with a friend about the porn you watch? Maybe you've talked from time to time about your thoughts on pornography as a medium, or about a porn star whose name was in the news, usually accompanied by some illegal activity, A-list celebrity whose name is being dragged through the mud, or negative spin. But can you remember a time when you talked to anyone about your personal preferences, or how your consumption of pornography has affected your sex life? When's the last time you leveled with someone about your feelings about adult entertainment? the real shit, the juicy stuff. If you're like most of us, your answer was probably never. Which is all to explain why, when the first magazine was purchased by a new parent company and reopened, I was happy to accept my reviewing job back in May of 2008. I'd spent a lot of time and energy grappling with the ways in which I didn't like my relationship with online pirated pornography. I had a lot of questions I still wanted to ask. They were messy, and many of them implicated me for my past, as well as the not entirely healthy way I'd been processing my personal trauma by watching emotionless, contextless clips for the sake of purely physical gratification. But it was starting to seem that facing those questions head-on might be better for my peace of mind than continuing to look for answers in a vacuum. So that's chapter 5, or at least most of it. Next time, we'll be on chapter 6, where I talk about Whack Magazine, the online adult industry magazine that I founded around that time. So I guess that's it. That's a wrap on chapter 5. When I'm reading aloud, a lot of the time my brain doesn't really process everything that I talked about, so now I'm going to think about it for a few minutes to see if I have anything I want to wrap up with. But in the meantime, if anyone who's watching has any questions, now is the time to ask, so we can have a little convo. Yeah, I'm thinking about the porn isn't for women thing. It's funny because I have written so much for so long about porn that is made for women, or for queer folks, or people who don't identify as cisgender men, right? There's a lot of porn being made for not necessarily cisgender male audiences these days, and I have been really privileged and thrilled to have gotten to know a lot of the people who make it, who make feminist porn, queer porn, porn for women by women, and I think I've written about it so much that I actually don't realize that not everybody knows about that stuff, that it's still a relatively under-discussed part of the porn industry, but it is out there, and I'm definitely going to talk a lot more about it in later chapters in the book. But the thing is that a lot of people, when they think of porn for women or feminist porn, have this idea of like Cinemax, Skinemax, soft focus, cinematic music and candles and everything, which is great. There's definitely that stuff out there, and for people who are into it, freaking fantastic. But a lot of the porn that I'm familiar with that gets made for female audiences, which are growing, the audience of women who want porn made for them is growing constantly and has been growing exponentially in the most recent years. But a lot of the material is it's not that soft focus, fancy music, perfect lighting kind of stuff. A lot of it is really, really hardcore and intense. And sometimes, to people who aren't, film buffs, or people who aren't, porn buffs, a lot of it might even look similar to porn that is made for men. And I think that that's important to know, to keep in mind, because that whole thing that I talked about in this chapter about how, porn is for men, women don't like porn because their brains are different, it's so reductive. And I think that one of the things that has kept porn for women from becoming a bigger deal, a bigger moneymaker, I guess, is that a lot of people who have investigated the concept of porn for women think that there's literally one thing. Okay, what is the answer to the question? what type of porn do women want? And then they want to answer that question with one answer, and they want to make that over and over and over again, which has been sort of the formula for a lot of porn that's been made for a long time, right? Like, you just basically do the same thing over and over again, you know, with different people in different outfits and different backgrounds, and there you go, you're done. I think that the reason that formulaic porn that's made by men with a male audience in mind, I think the reason that works is because that's like what there is, you know? There's always been other stuff that's more like fringe oriented, you know, for different audiences, but it's harder to find, right? So anytime that you're going for, you know, maximum profit, maximum viewership, you tend to make the same thing that's just been made before, because you know that that's what sells, and you're better off, you're more likely to make money if that's what you make, so you just make the same thing. That's what people have been doing for decades with porn. And so I think that there's this idea that that's what men want to see, and men are the ones who will pay for porn, so that is what we are going to make. And then the idea that, like, somebody might make something from a different perspective that looks or feels different, people automatically want to assume that it's, you know, the soft lighting, fancy music, candlelight kind of stuff, because that's what we've been told women want. And sure, lots of women do want that. Probably lots of men want that too. Lots of non-binary people. Everybody. There's some people from every group that want that. Great. But what I'm saying is, there's a lot of other stuff out there, and that I think this desire to lump women want this and men want this, and that's all there is to this equation, is just overlooking so much. And I do think that within the world of pornography, people who make porn, there's an understanding of that. You know, there are people who do, like, just paint with broad strokes, you know, make it as generic as you can, sell it. There's plenty of that. But most people who are involved in making porn realize that there are so many different people with so many different fantasies and turn-ons and preferences, that you can make porn for almost any audience. The difficulty is whether you can, you know, be profitable enough at it to continue doing it. And a lot of the time, if you're making something that has a much more niche audience in mind, it's just harder to sell because there aren't as many people to sell it to, obviously. But the thing that I've seen with porn for women is that women don't have just one thing that they want. Women are a vast group that has vastly different interests and desires. And a lot of the time, what that ends up looking like is a lot more edgy and hardcore than people expect it to be. And I think that can be confronting for some people, but it's the damn truth. Yeah, so, like, you know, just if you go online and you look up porn for women, just be prepared to see things that you're not expecting. And then talk about it. Write to me. Tell me about it. I want to know. I want to know what your experience is like. And tell other people about it. You know, if you find a feminist pornographer whose work you like, freaking tell your friends. Tell them to go get a subscription to that website. You know, support that person, because it's tough out there. It's tough out there for all of us who are creative people who are making things, and it's especially tough for porn. And again, we'll sort of get into the details of why that is true in later chapters. But yeah, okay, so that was a ramble. That was a ramble brought to you by Lynsey G, writer. Yeah, so it doesn't look like people are having a lot of questions this week, which is cool, because again, I have not fed myself yet. Well, I did have an apple with peanut butter, which was delicious, but it really just kind of made me hungrier. So I'm probably going to go pretty soon and do that. But before I do, hey, everybody, go to Kickstarter. Look up Tracy Queen, Volume 1. If you can, it would be great if you could back it. If you can't, or if you can and you want to be super helpful, share it with the world, because I am kickstarting my very first sex-positive, feminist, pulp sci-fi graphic novel. Thanks, Tracy. And Tracy Queen, who it's written about, she's right there. She's kind of a big deal. She's in chat right now. She is promoting the Kickstarter. Thank you, Tracy. We are about a week and a half out from the end of the Kickstarter. We have a lot of room left to go. Right now, I think we're at like right around 30% funded. So we've got a long way to go in a week and a half. But here's the thing. I think we can do it. Because this book is like, I said this before, but this book is important. I really believe in it. I've never written anything that I felt this strongly about before in my life. It's important because it tells a story it tells a story that isn't the type of story that usually gets told. It's about a complicated, complex, difficult, problematic woman who tries her damnedest to be the best that she can be, and that involves her having a lot of sex. And I think that stories about women who have a lot of sex and own it and love it and feel empowered by it are freaking terrifying to the world. I mean, have you seen the pushback that Stormy Daniels has gotten? Like, if you follow her Twitter, she often will retweet horrible, horrible, nasty things that people say about her, and she always makes light of them. She is strong as fuck. But, you know, she's a woman who decided that she wanted to make porn, became a big deal porn star, became a porn director and producer, and is now world famous for having had an affair with Donald Trump, which, you know, poor decision making on her part, which she has said publicly. But people hate her. People hate her. And I think it's because we've been told for since time immemorial, many of us who are the products of Western culture have been taught that women who do sex work must be broken because they're clearly being manipulated and forced into this line of work by some man who controls their sexuality. And that's just, it's sad. You know, it's very sad. And that can be true, but very often it's not. And I think that we're told that that's always true because the idea of a woman who owns her own sexuality and has made a decision to flaunt it and to profit on it, and to actually, like, in many cases, use, like, sort of exploit the people who think they're exploiting her for her own gain. That narrative is terrifying. It is so scary to sort of the establishment that, you know, wants us to be ashamed of our sexuality. And it is so scary that those stories don't get told. You know, most of the stories that we hear in media, in pop culture about people who do sex work are depressing. You know, they're sad. This poor victimized person. And again, you know, it's not that doesn't happen. It does, and that's terrible. That our sexuality is that our sexuality makes us so vulnerable that we can be taken advantage of because of it. But I think that there are a lot of people who don't feel that way about their sexuality, and their stories aren't being told. And I think it's really important. You know, it's important to know that that's possible, that there are the Stormy Danielses of the world out there. And so I think that Tracy Queen, because it's a comic book, you know, it has the ability to reach a lot of people who wouldn't normally necessarily interact with this type of story. And it can get the story that, you know, you don't have to be broken to do sex work, and that a lot of people who do sex work are freaking awesome people who love their lives. Also, you know, there's like cyborgs and sex, and there's a talking raccoon, and I mean, it's a fun story. It's funny. It's enjoyable. And I think the world needs it. So anyway, okay, that's enough of me talking about my own project, but I really do believe in it. So if you can go check out the Kickstarter and give us a boost, that would be freaking fabulous. We could definitely use it. Yeah, and I guess that's about it. So the next time that I'm going to be doing one of these readings will actually be the Sunday after Thanksgiving here in the United States. Let me check on the date for that. That will be Sunday, November 25th. I'll be reading chapter 6, which will tell you about how I started Whack Magazine, which is an industry trade publication that I ran for 3 years-ish, and how that came to be. It's a fun story. And yeah, I guess that's about it for now. So thank you for everyone who watched and who will be watching this in the future. Tune back in on the 25th of November. Same time, same place. And I'll see you then. All right, bye.